up, everybody? Welcome back to Off the Bench. I'm Brandon Carney alongside Pat Gustafson. Pat, how we doing today? Look, Saquon Barkley got a little bit extra money today, so he's having a good day. But how's it going for you?
Confused when I woke up to that news. But good. It's stormy out here in suburban Connecticut. So hopefully I don't disappear halfway through this. But
it's a little gray here, not exactly stormy. But look, we've had our fair share of fucked up weather. So I will take this. Pretty normal standard weather we got going on. Pat, the Saquon thing I woke up to, and I'll be honest. Like you, I was also confused. I figured that ship had completely sailed for a deal to get done. The deadline passed for an extension to get done, so we couldn't get a multi-year deal. We wake up to see something that even Ian Rappaport referred to as a rarity.
Surprise.
Surprise. But something that I guess made sense given the situation. We talked a lot about it last week, Pat, about Saquon sitting out this year wouldn't have really done anything for him. So we were at a point where the Giants kind of had all the leverage, and what this seems like is they basically threw him a bone. They said, look, we want you in camp. Ultimately, you probably have no choice but to play this year if you want to make money. He realizes he's probably just going to get tagged again next year, unless he's awful this year or something. And so what the Giants basically did was they gave him the franchise tag, the same exact amount, but including $2 million of it as a signing bonus and giving him about $900,000 worth of incentives. Those incentives are spread evenly across these three goals he needs to reach throughout the season, that being 1,300 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns, 65 receptions. So basically each of those is about $300,000. All very reachable. Some of them, look, that would be a good year for Saquon, right? And I think this makes me, especially for fantasy football, even more interested than I already was maybe, because these are numbers, objective numbers on paper that he's going to be trying to reach. Yeah. So he's motivated. But Pat, what was your reaction when you saw this deal got done, other than just straight up confused?
Just from the fantasy perspective, awesome. Again, if you're drafting this early, you are a psychopath like we were.
Correct.
About
I do have him in my Scott
Fish
Fishbowl team, though, and I would have been very much in trouble if he didn't end up playing, because I have no other running backs on that team.
The biggest thing for me is just what does this accomplish if you're Saquon Barkley? Because at this one, when he did not sign the tag, he obviously still didn't ever sign the tag, but when they didn't come to a deal and it seemed like, he's not going to play. Josh Jacobs did the same thing. You've got all these cryptic tweets. You've got Zoom meetings via Austin Eckler.
That was wild. It's like 15
I hear
of the NFL's
Ezekiel
top
Elliott
running backs.
is still sitting at his computer waiting for the link for that one, but I just don't get it, because I figured either he would just kind of sign the tag, or they would really lean into this whole pseudo RB strike, more of a protest than a strike. Right. I would call it. But the thing I just don't get is that it's clear that the players do not want to play hardball with the owners, and because they know the owners have so much power, they have all the leverage, and there's not much they can do. We talked about it last week that yes, this is a problem, but there's no solution. What are you going to do? Strike? They'll just find running backs and probably disprove your whole theory that you guys are as valuable as you think you are. And it's not like other guys around the league are going to strike for the running backs. Quarterbacks and receivers. No one else was going to strike on behalf of your position. So I just don't get why they made such a huge stink of this. But again, it is a problem. It's fair. Only to give in to slightly towards your demands a week later. It's just this whole last week with this nonsense just felt like a waste of time.
Yeah, it is really weird. And you do still have, Josh Jacobs out there in limbo. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with him, because he obviously hasn't, succumbed to any sort of deal like this. And he's not planning to report to training camp anytime soon, according to reports. So look, that's still unresolved. I'm not sure. What I think is going to happen here is, if there's no strike, which it doesn't seem like we're trending toward that, this whole running backs being treated unfairly thing might just be sort of a slow burn, where over the next decade or so, players aren't going to want to be running backs is the issue here. And you're going to have some of the most potentially talented running backs not even be playing that position and have that not come to fruition. I think you'll end up with a league full of more replacement level, boring running backs. And will the league care? Maybe not, but that's I think where we're headed. Like the genetic freaks and the guys like Adrian Peterson and the Saquon Barkleys who are just jump off the page, Derrick Henry, jump off the page athletes. I think that we'll probably see less and less of those, and it may be in the NFL's best interest before that fully takes hold to do something and treat their players a little bit better. That's the only incentive I can think of because there's nothing immediate. There's no immediate need.
We saw this. God, this was a long time ago. This point, probably more than 5. Oh, God, probably close to 10 years ago with the whole tight end issue with Jimmy Graham. Granted, he's relevant today somehow. And Jordan Cameron. I believe there are a few others who were like putting NFL pass catcher in their Twitter bios.
Mike Gesicki tried to do it most recently.
Because they're like, again, maybe it's the fact that the running backs are more important and have more star power, and they're going to get more notoriety from fans and the media and whatnot. But that went away entirely from the tight end perspective.
Yeah.
And it's not going to go away in the sense because I think it's just going to keep getting worse and worse. I think that the owners are just going to keep trending towards this. Give me someone who's cheap and give me someone who's young. Maybe not quite as talented, but let me put a decent, younger, cheaper guy in my solid system with a good offensive line, and I'll still win football games. So I think it's only going to get worse, and it's just going to be a matter of do these players actually want to play ball with the owners?
Yeah, it's a risky proposition for sure because, again, the shelf lives of these running backs are already so short that if you start to play the game of, all right, am I going to sit out and try to prove a point? Are you going to throw your whole career away for the good of your position or something to that effect? That's a dramatic way to look at it. It's something that's probably unlikely to happen, so it's really not.
And it's clear Saquon wasn't.
Yeah, Saquon was not. He basically, he said that he was he said he wasn't sure if he was prepared for a sitting out type of situation, but again, there was really no upside to doing so he caved, and I think the Giants just kind of in good quote unquote good faith gave him a little something to make him feel better, I guess.
And I get wanting to I get why he did it in the first place. Make a statement, prove your point, get people talking about this. Do it for more than a week. It's hard to see. Yes, we're taking a stand. Then a week later, it's almost like what's that meme where it's like the kid standing there with a peace sign and then just vanishes into thin air like that. That feels like Saquon at this Zoom call.
Exactly. It was very interesting. One thing I did find also interesting was, Pat, there's been all this talk about the deal that Saquon had been offered, potentially during the offseason. Nothing really ever concrete confirmed about what those figures were. We kept hearing, maybe $13 million a year, $14 million a year, people saying, why would he not just accept that? This from Ryan Dunleavy at the New York Post. He said that the contract that Saquon was offered would have been $19.5 million guaranteed over 2 years. That is less money than getting franchise tagged twice. So if that is a true figure, that makes a lot of sense as to why Saquon did not accept that money, because he's like, look, if I'm going to get tagged, I'm going to end up getting more money that way. Like, pay me more. That's the whole point of an extension. The number may have looked prettier because it would have been non-guaranteed money and it would have been 2 years, 26, 27 million, whatever it may be. But he's actually going to get paid more if he does, in fact, get the second tag on top of this first pseudo tag. I guess he didn't actually sign the tag here, but you know what I mean? So that kind of sheds some light, assuming that number is real. But again, pure speculation until we hear it from Saquon being like, this is what I was offered. All we know is he wasn't trying to reset the market. But either way, good news for Saquon, good news for fantasy owners, good news for me in particular, Pat, because I selected my draft spot in our league, number 7 overall, with the specific plan in mind of, okay, I expect Justin Jefferson to get picked somewhere in the top 6, and then there were exactly 6 running backs that I felt were worth high-end first-round draft capital. And I was like, truthfully, I don't care which one of them I get. At least one of them will be available when we get to pick 7. And once Saquon decided to hold out, I was like, I swear to God, if these exact guys all get picked before me, I'm going to be so mad. It was still unlikely, but it gives me that nice little fallback of I'm going to get one of the guys I like, thankfully. Maybe it will be Saquon Barkley. That'd be a fun little thing to keep track of here on the pod, given his situation this year. Pat, another fantasy darling, a former Giant. Some news on him today. Kadarius Toney underwent surgery to clean up cartilage in his knee. Andy Reid said there's a chance he's ready for week 1. This is a guy I mentioned, I want to say a month ago or so, where we were talking about, I think when we were talking about the AFC West, where to me, Kadarius Toney has obviously so much upside, such an electric player. He's playing with Patrick Mahomes, but I just had a feeling that drafting him and hoping for production from this guy, it felt like you're just going to be chasing the dragon forever and not actually catching it. And we're starting to get, that feeling again where he's already facing injury issues. Maybe it's just his play style. I mean, the guy cuts like I've never seen in my life. I'm not surprised that his, ligaments, joints, bones, whatever, are having trouble dealing with that. He just plays so hard. But Pat, how do you feel about Kadarius? What's your reaction to this news? And was he a guy who was on your fantasy radar at all anyway?
I mean, he was absolutely on my radar because as we've talked about week after week, outside of Travis Kelce, there is no clear number 2 option in that offense. And Toney clearly had the highest upside of that wide receiver room, a first-round draft pick. Clearly shown to be explosive, clearly shown that he could do lots of different things, be a gadget guy. Andy Reid loves his gadget guys. So at the very least, you're taking a guy with crazy upside and you're taking him in a point in your draft where that's okay to do that. But I think this is just more of a greater indication. He had that kind of nagging injury in New York and then now this. It seems like these are sort of nagging injuries that sort of take a while to kind of get taken care of. And Reed's outlook is grim. Has a chance to be ready for week 1.
You don't want to hear that. Training camp just started. You don't want to hear that.
You see these types of things happen. It'll be like, he'll be fine for the starter. He'll be back for the preseason. But he has a chance to play week 1. That is not coach talk. That is not confidence. And that is honesty. And in that instance, I feel like that's optimism from this perspective. What I will say, though, is I liked Sky Moore even with Kadarius Toney in the picture. Potentially just because of, obviously didn't play great last year, but he slowly started picking up towards the end of the year, more targets, more snaps, everything. And him and Toney are similar players, and without him, if Moore can be this gadget guy, catch these dump-offs and have great speed, and where you're getting him as well, sky's the limit. Oh, boo, bad joke.
Boo.
Oh, fuck.
Boo.
Yeah, damn it.
I agree with you, though. Sky Moore has been one of my main targets in the much later rounds of drafts because, I think there is a chance that in this Chiefs offense, nobody emerges as a clear target other than Travis Kelce. That was what happened last year. Take it from a Juju Smith-Schuster owner. It did not materialize. Neither he nor anybody else, not Marquez Valdez-Scantling, not Byron Pringle, who the fuck ever. Nobody emerged as sort of a reliable second target in that offense that you could rely on in fantasy. I think if there's anybody worth taking that gamble on this year, it is Sky Moore. It's a guy who is entering his second year in a system that he admitted was difficult to learn, that he admitted there was an adjustment period. And I think, the draft capital spent on him, it was like a mid-second round pick or late second round pick. So it's not low. It's not a small amount of draft capital. I mean, obviously he's not a first rounder, but I don't think anybody on this team is. The other receivers on this team, you've got Rashee Rice drafted this year. Sky Moore has already taught me I'm not really going to be banking on a rookie production.
I was about to say we could see a complete repeat of Sky Moore with Rashee Rice, even though they took him in the second round. Andy Reid has shown that if you're not ready for his offense, you're not going to play much in his offense. And
Exactly. And we know who Marquez Valdez-Scantling is at this point. He's not going to be a consistent starter for your fantasy team. He never will be. And then you've got Richie James, he's kind of just another guy. He's going to be decent some weeks, maybe. It's a good signing for them. I like it as a real football signing.
He was the product of a decimated Giants wide receiver room last year. I mean, he's a perpetual kind of special teamer, number 4 or 5 guy in your room. He's not doing much.
No, decent depth guy, but I think Sky Moore may be the one guy on this team whose talent, at least the ceiling for his talent, could let him emerge as the other maybe somewhat reliable target on this team. So I think he's as worthy of a pick as any from this Chiefs team. Probably the only receiver I'm really taking a stab at, because again, the other guys are just kind of lower upside players. Look, maybe Patrick Mahomes falls in love with Richie James. Who knows? Anything can happen. But I think Sky Moore is a guy. All the hype coming out of college and people expecting something from him his rookie year and being let down, that didn't materialize. But I do think there's a chance for him to turn into something here. And his ADP is in what? 10th round or so last time I checked, 9th, 10th, something like that, maybe later. So he's a late round pick that I think is worth taking. And the Kadarius Toney injury, just a reminder of that. Pat, another wide receiver here. So this came out a few days ago, maybe a week ago. So Jordan Addison was cited for speeding and reckless driving, going 140 miles per hour in a 55. Now, when I first heard this, I was like, great. We've got another, rookie or another football player in general that is just going to make stupid choices and maybe derail his career because of it. Nobody wants to take this stuff as a joke after what happened with Henry Ruggs, obviously. And this was not a joke either. But I will make a little joke out of it here because he later said it was for a medical emergency involving his dog. And as far as I'm concerned, this occurred at 3 a.m. He is absolved of all responsibility here. Not actually, because don't do that shit. But like, if he's going to do it for any reason, he wasn't just trying to go for a joyride. He wasn't trying to show up his buddies or doing something dumb like that. If this is true, according to the citation, look, he's trying to get his dog to the vet for an emergency. I get it, Jordan. I get it.
Absolutely. And the very different reason, if this is true, from Henry Ruggs, where he just, spent a night at Top Golf and was, for whatever the fuck reason, going that fast.
Yeah.
So, again, for the reason, I think he'll get it lighter. But, again, it's just a matter of, no one was in the way. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, all it took was one car to be stopped somewhere. And, again, granted, he had his instincts. He wasn't under the influence of anything. Mm-hmm. When you're going that fast, your instincts don't mean much. You could turn the fucking car off for all you want. That thing's not going to slow down in time. Yeah. It's just a fortunate situation, one that nobody got hurt, two, that the intentions weren't good. I mean, I don't think he gets suspended for this. Like, there have been plenty of guys that get these things. I think it's just the severity of it. He'll probably maybe get a fine. I think that's fair. He'll catch a fine from the league for something, but you're not suspended for something like this. But just like, I didn't even know cars go that fast. Like,
right.
How do, like, I mean, admittedly, I've gone triple digits before, admittedly, and I was like, how is my car physically doing this? Yeah. But like 140, like, I don't care what you're doing, where you're going, you're gonna kill somebody. You're gonna kill yourself.
I would not be comfortable going that speed, but hey, look, he's trying to save the dog. Guilty. He is guilty in some respect, but he is going to be extremely innocent in the court of public opinion. I'm just glad that this didn't, result in something more major, because I am excited to see what Jordan Addison can do. To shift this to a fantasy perspective, like Adam Thielen gone, there's so many targets up for grabs there, and this is a guy who I think is maybe more poised than any other rookie to contribute very early on. So he's a guy that I'm very much looking at.
Oh yeah, I've said it time and time again that I prefer him to JSN in redraft leagues. I think he's going to be the more productive player. I think the opportunity's perfect, and again, just fortunate that nobody got hurt here.
Yeah,
doesn't seem like it's going to affect his bearing, and move past it and roll with it.
And I hope the dog is okay. Pat, look, maybe even more important pass-catching news here. Jimmy Graham has signed back with the New Orleans Saints in what is maybe the most confusing signing I've seen all offseason. This is a team, Pat, that look, we talked last week about Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau, and, we were like, Foster Moreau's not that good, whatever, but overall, the Saints have more depth at tight end than a lot of teams in the NFL.
They still got Adam Troutman, too, or where's he at?
I think he got traded to the Broncos, I want to say, so I don't think he's around, but they do have Taysom, who's technically a tight end, and look, like that three deep at tight end, Johnson, Moreau, and Hill, that's as good as any team in the league, I think, for depth. And now they go out and sign Jimmy Graham. Look, if this was a one-day retirement contract,
that's what I thought it was.
That's what I thought it was. This guy didn't even play last year, so I don't know. I guess he's probably just going to come in as a vet presence. But then I'm like, what does he need to be a vet presence for? Juwan Johnson's not a rookie. Like, he's been in the league a couple years now. Weird signing. He's going to pop up and score a touchdown in week 7, I'm sure. And
exactly.
I don't know.
Again, I'm sure people are. This is absolute nothing. This is absolute nothing except kind of the big what the fuck moment. Like you said, I guarantee he's going to catch. If his over under is half a touchdown this year, hammer the fucking over, because there's going to be one week where it's like Jimmy Graham vultures the entire Saints offense one time. And it's going to be infuriating, which basically that's what he did with the Bears. I mean, he just was a pest to Cole Kmet that year. Kmet never had a chance that year just because of Graham, but he's so old. And even that was 2 years ago, and he was slow, and he was bad with the Packers. And this is just, a very likable guy. I mean, who doesn't love Jimmy Graham? One of the best tight ends of the last decade, but it's like, cool story. Have a good time. I hope you make the team, but this is nothing. For fantasy, at least for fantasy, this is nothing. Even for real life, this is nothing.
No, it's not. Pat, do you remember in our league when we shifted from we didn't used to have a flex spot. We had running back / wide receiver. And then we finally shifted to a flex spot like right before the draft. And then our buddy Mike took Gronk and Graham, I think, with his first two picks.
Yeah, 12-13.
Yeah.
He took,
that's
he
a
took
thing.
him at the
That's
turn.
a thing that happened. I just wanted to mention that because that sticks out in my head forever.
And I'd like to mention the year it was Jimmy Graham's second year in the league. The year he popped, I took him in our league. It was our first ever year. I took him in the 14th round, and he fucking popped.
You
and
sure did.
To this day, like that's probably the best pick I've had in that league. I peaked in the first year. That's probably the best value pick I've ever had in that league.
Oh, man. What would be the best value pick? I know our first year in the league, I took Matt Stafford in like the 13th round, and that was his best year. So that was a good, like, that led, I went like 10-2 that year.
Yeah, I know. I took him in the second round next year because of that.
I
fucking
think
stunk. I stacked him with Calvin Johnson, and they both fucking stunk.
My best pick had to be Cooper Kupp a couple years ago, even though I didn't win it all. I think Cooper Kupp I got in like the 5th round, and the guy was just Jesus Christ incarnate. So it'd have to be him. But yeah, I look back, and when Mike took those two, Gronk and Graham, I didn't realize Graham, that was his first year with the Seahawks that he took him, and he was terrible. Like that was the offseason he went to the Seahawks. And it was just a bad pick. But Pat, sticking with the Saints here, this topic is random, but we've talked about this guy. I think we talked about him last week, right? Because it was the AFC South. It was our final, little delve into fantasy football by division. And we talked about Michael Thomas. I've done some digging, Pat, and I've changed my tune a bit on Michael Thomas. I don't honestly remember what I said last week, but I know I wasn't taking too hard of a stance either way, I don't think. But I think I like Michael Thomas. He's not a guy that, I'm going to be trotting out as my wide receiver 2 week 1 or anything like that. But I think people are starting to overrate or over worry about his injury status. I look at the fact that, yes, he hasn't played a full season since 2019 when he went absolutely apeshit with 1 million yards and 1 million touchdowns. He hasn't played the past 3 seasons, which is without a doubt a concern. But when you look at why, I think taking a stab on him this year becomes a little more reasonable. He missed basically 2 years with the same injury because he fucked up rehab, or he didn't get surgery when he should have, and it just extended the recovery process forever, right? Last year, he comes back, plays 3 games, scores like 3 touchdowns across those 3 games, gets peppered with targets, 8 targets, 9 targets in each game, and then he goes down with an unrelated toe injury. Now, I'm just not in the market of looking at weird little fluke injuries like a toe injury and acting like that's going to happen again. Look, maybe this is a guy who just doesn't take care of his body enough and he's going to keep suffering these injuries. But this isn't a hamstring type of thing. This isn't, a generally reoccurring injury. I just think Michael Thomas is 30. He's around the same age as Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, guys who are being drafted without any remote concern for their age. And I look at the Saints and I'm like, they got Chris Olave. And I mean, yeah, maybe Rashid Shaheed's a thing. Maybe Juwan Johnson's going to score some touchdowns. But I'm just saying I am not ruling out Michael Thomas finishing as a wide receiver 2 by the end of the year. That's lofty, I know. But it's a guy that I think when you look at who he's being drafted around, I mean, you can get this guy in like the 8th, 9th round. He's as good a bet as any for me. And I know you're probably not in on him, but I just wanted to get that out there because I think the injury thing, it's become like when Saquon tore his ACL and then the following year he like accidentally stepped on his teammate's ankle and everybody was like, oh, he's injury prone. And I'm like, guys, he stepped on the guy's ankle. The play was over. Like sometimes bad luck, bullshit injuries happen. He's just a guy that I'm looking at and I could see nobody's really talking about right now, and then before you know it, he's a weekly flex starter. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I am probably going to disagree as hard as I've disagreed with anything you've said in our run.
We don't have to worry about you sniping me on him then. Good.
You won't unless it's like the last round of the draft. You don't have to worry about it. I think there's a lot of a lot of the things that you said. Like 30, who cares? Like he's a wide receiver. If you're 30 years old, not a huge deal. But a lot of these injuries he had, it's clear that the ankle was nagging. He had an ankle, then a hamstring, then an ankle again, and then he took him out all of 2021. And then a toe injury, which, as we know, is like probably the most important thing for a receiver, which was why it kept him down for most of the year last year. You think of a toe and you're just like, how bad can it be? But these aren't like, when you talk about Saquon, he tears his ACL, high ankle sprain. Like, those are kind of freak things that happen.
Mm-hmm.
These are small, nagging things that he's had a difficult time recovering from. And again, you said 2019 was the last time this guy produced. And God, did he. One of the best seasons. But he was also playing with Drew Brees, who at that point in his career was the check down god.
Sure.
And then last year he was playing with Jameis Winston, who just, I don't know what he is. And then you look at it this year with Derek Carr. I think Chris Olave fits a lot more of what Derek Carr can do with throwing the ball a little deeper. And I don't think Carr is going to be nearly as reliant on checkdowns as some of the other guys. But it's just the combination of these nagging injuries and his age and the fact that we haven't seen a productive year. And I watched your QB Madden ratings video where, like you said, Lamar won MVP in 2019 and that anything before COVID was a decade ago. And that's what it feels like with Michael Thomas. It feels like we have seen nothing from Michael Thomas. And I'll take that sample size over the 3 weeks we saw last year, which, granted, very good. Numbers don't lie. He had a nice little run there. Who knows how long, if that would have persisted. But like you said again, though, any guy you're picking on your bench, sure, go for it.
Yeah.
But there are just a lot of better guys that, one, I think have the upside, have way less risk, and have a much better floor. And he's another guy that I think is going to get propelled by name value. I think people are going to see, like, we've got a couple guys in our league who around that time are going to be like, oh, Michael Thomas, he was good when I paid attention to football 10 years ago. Like, I'm going to pick him in the 6th round. It's like, have him. So for the value, like, whatever. But just I say all the time, every player has a value. There is no value for Michael Thomas for me. I will not be taking Michael Thomas under almost all circumstances.
I understand that. I look at it from a perspective of, look, the two factors for being a desirable fantasy football asset are what? Talent and opportunity, right? Once you get this late, everybody you look at lacks one or the other. Michael Thomas does not lack either one, at least out of the gate.
That's fair.
So it's the injury concern, and Chris Olave, if the Saints are smart, will lead that team in targets regardless of Michael Thomas's health. Just a guy that I could see them throwing a decent amount, and when you look at him around, like, okay, Michael Thomas on Fantasy Pros right now is ranked wide receiver 50. There's guys above him that I would probably rather as a dart throw. I mean, like Jameson Williams, I might eat the 6 weeks, honestly, the more that I've thought about it, just because he's going to be sitting on my bench anyway. Elijah Moore is an interesting guy in the newfound Browns offense. But, like, Juju Smith-Schuster, I don't really have interest in. I'm not the biggest Zay Flowers guy. Alan Lazard is, like, right behind him. Just a guy that, I'll be thinking about when we get to that point. So that's all I wanted to say. Just a guy who I've kind of randomly changed my tune on. I don't know what sparked this, but I dug into some research this morning. I was like, you know what? His injuries might be a little overblown, but I also understand if the risk is too much for you. Pat, speaking of values, so the running back dead zone is something that has long been talked about, and we kind of talked about it. I mentioned the other week about Rachaad White versus Alexander Mattison. I was faced with that choice in a mock draft, and I was kind of sitting there up until the buzzer, unsure who I was going to take, and I think I said I settled on Rachaad White. But overall, the running back dead zone is super interesting this year because it's not that dead. I feel like we have more value in the late 3rd to like 6th rounds than we've ever seen before, whereas in the past, it was if you didn't get your running backs before or by like early 3rd round, you were looking at some real question marks. And I think this year, yes, those question marks exist. I mean, there's a reason these guys are not first rounders, but the question marks are much more, you can live with them. And there's guys, more importantly, with very high projected workloads, which that's what I found surprising because you look at the dead zone from last year. So, like I said, that range late 3rd and beyond. You have guys like Antonio Gibson, Travis Etienne, A.J. Dillon, Elijah Mitchell, Breece Hall, Miles Sanders, Rashad Penny, Kareem Hunt, Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson. Just some of the names that you would find there if you spent your early picks on only one running back or a couple receivers, whatever. And guys like, look, some of those guys obviously worked out. Miles Sanders had a very, very good year. Ramondre Stevenson had a good year. Breece Hall was on fire before he fell off. But
RB1, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
He was close to it.
But a lot of these guys, you went in drafting them knowing that their workload was not going to be, massive. Antonio Gibson, part-time player. A.J. Dillon, literal backup. You knew that. Kareem Hunt, backup. Backup. Kareem Hunt was a backup. Ramondre Stevenson or Damian Harris, one or the other, you knew was going to be a backup. Rashad Penny, backup, right? No?
He went in as the starter.
Went in as a starter. Okay, I couldn't remember.
Obviously, the injuries and Kenneth Walker was what he was in the dead zone for a reason, though.
Exactly. There were a lot of question marks last year, and again, the question marks are there this year too. But you have guys who might be legitimate, like 20 touch a game guys, and that's not an overly optimistic viewpoint on things. So the guys that are kind of in the dead zone this year, I look at Jahmyr Gibbs as kind of the captain of the dead zone. I feel like every time I'm in a mock draft, it's like, he's the guy that's there for me in the 4th round if I want him, regardless of format. So if I've waited on running back a little. And he's also kind of not ranked near a bunch of backs directly above him, at least in the mocks lately. Things are always shifting. But he's, I think, the captain of the dead zone. And then you've got guys like Kenneth Walker, Dameon Pierce, Miles Sanders again, J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, Alexander Madison, James Conner, Rashad White, David Montgomery, Isaiah Pacheco, and DeAndre Swift. I just think this is such a robust cast of guys that, if you spend your early picks on receivers or even Travis Kelce or even quarterback, if you want, I think there's just so much more you can do this year because of the value that is going to be at the running back position from rounds 3 to 6.
And that's the reason why we've talked about it week in and week out. Quarterbacks are being way high, not overvalued, but highly valued compared to years past, because we've seen if you've got an elite quarterback, doesn't matter where those points come from. If you're getting 30 points from any player in a week, that's going to help a lot. And then, in PPR leagues, wide receivers are still king. And it's funny because there's basically almost like 2 archetypes in this dead zone in years past, but it's in one. It's basically guys who are perceived to be part-time players. Whether or not they're getting 70% of the snaps, there's still someone else in that picture that could eat away from that. And the biggest guy that you listed that I am shocked about is Kenneth Walker. And, we've talked about the Zach Charbonnet hysteria. I had it right when they drafted him. I'm like, what are they doing? What are they doing? But again, I think this comes down to the fact that, when Walker got hurt, they had Tony Jones and, Travis Homer. Mm-hmm. And Walker's not a great pass catcher, and they run more 3 wide receiver sets than any team in the league. So they probably thought to themselves, hey, we want to vary things a little more offensively here. We want to do this. And Charbonnet's the perfect kind of guy, and he'll cut into some of Kenneth Walker's workload. But this is still a guy who's easily going to be getting 15 to 20 carries in what should be a good offense with plentiful red zone opportunities. So if you're telling me, if I have to pull one guy out of this dead zone and pick him in, the first 2.5 rounds, I'm taking Kenneth Walker from that group.
Oh, man. If I had to pick one guy. So that's the other point of talking about this dead zone is also to parse through and figure out, which guys we do like more than others. And when it comes down to it on draft day, who are you going to take? Kenneth Walker is going, a little earlier than some of these other guys. I think he's probably second in command behind Gibbs or maybe above him, depending on the format. I think this is probably the most format-dependent comparison because Gibbs is going to be a PPR darling, whereas Walker is more of a non-PPR guy.
In a standard league, as we weekly reference, our main league is not PPR, and that's why I am out on Jahmyr Gibbs at his value in a non-PPR format.
Yeah, I think Kenneth Walker is a guy that you look at the talent and you think, we know he's a talented player. I'm a little concerned. If I had to pluck anyone out of here, Pat, it would actually be Jahmyr Gibbs, and he's at the top of it. But here's what I dug into with Jahmyr Gibbs, right? So DeAndre Swift in his time in Detroit averaged 5.4 targets and 9.3 carries per game. That was his last 2 years. Over 17 games, that would be 158 carries and 93 targets. So in theory, for a guy that, this regime drafted with a high pick, they admitted they would have considered taking him at number 6 if they couldn't trade down. It's a guy they're in love with. That should be the floor for his touches, one would think, because look, they had Jamal Williams when all this was going down. You can pretty much transfer Jamal Williams' touches over to David Montgomery.
Who is better than him, by the way, I think by a fair amount.
Fair. And so you're looking at 158 carries and 93 targets should be the floor. Fun fact here, Pat. Alvin Kamara's rookie year, he finished as PPR RB3, standard RB4. His rookie year, he only had 120 carries and 100 targets. That is right in line with what Jahmyr Gibbs, in theory, should be picking up here from Swift behind one of the league's best offensive lines. And when we're not talking about running between the tackles, because that's not supposed to be his strength, you've got a guy who is remarkably efficient, one of the most efficient college receivers as a running back that we've ever seen. So not only is he going to get, a decent number of touches, they're going to be very, very high quality touches. And I think that sort of thing gives him value even in non-PPR. And you look at the touchdowns Jamal Williams scored last year, and people immediately want to transfer like all of them over to David Montgomery. That's 17 touchdowns. Like,
oh, no way.
There's even a level of luck that comes into like the touchdowns that are, you spread the touchdowns across the Lions running back room. It's bound to be more even just for the fact that that is such a ridiculous number for one guy to get.
Well, it was also just clear that Dan Campbell just didn't quite care for DeAndre Swift in terms
exactly.
He did not believe in him. They obviously believe more in Jahmyr Gibbs. And like you say with the luck too, I mentioned it before. I had so much Amon-Ra last year, and that motherfucker had to have gotten tackled at the one at least 6 times. Just so many times. So again, granted, even get a few of those, you're looking at a completely different scope from Jamal Williams. But I think when you talk about Gibbs, just the biggest thing is not necessarily that David Montgomery is there, is that you can't take away what kind of pass catcher he is. And it's known that Detroit is going to use 2 running backs. But it's almost like the fact that I don't know if Gibbs is going to get many goal line carries inside the 10. And I mean, that's okay. Like, you can still be valuable in fantasy, especially in PPR without that. But I think that's the reason why he's in the dead zone. And that's why I think that's a fair place for him to be.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting to point out that, a guy like Kamara was able to put up those numbers with so few touches. And granted, is that, sort of an outlier situation? Absolutely. We haven't seen 2 running backs perform like that together maybe ever. I don't think Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt even reached the heights that Kamara and Ingram reached that year. So it is interesting to point to it. But look, it's a ceiling, right? It's a ceiling you can point to for a guy who is built similarly, is going to have a similar workload, and maybe could reach that. But trying to parse through the other guys, because look, Jahmyr Gibbs and Kenneth Walker are obviously kind of the top tier of this.
I'd throw J.K. Dobbins in there as well.
I'm with you there. I'm with you. He is starting training camp on the PUP list. It's not exactly clear why, to be honest with you. He's listed with the knee, but it was the knee injury that he dealt with last year and kind of popped off at the end of the season. So I don't know if it's just a management thing. Hopefully it wasn't a tweak that we didn't hear about.
And side note, they signed Melvin Gordon, arguably more nothing than Jimmy Graham.
I like that they signed Melvin Gordon. I like for J.K. Dobbins' value.
Yes, absolutely.
I'd rather them sign Melvin Gordon than sign Kareem Hunt or Ezekiel Elliott.
One million %.
I
forgot Melvin Gordon still played football. Like, he sat in that Chiefs running back room purgatory and couldn't even emerge out of that when there was no clear way to emerge. Like, this guy, I don't think he's even going to make the team. I was shocked at the amount of chatter this was getting, because it's like, nothing,
it's a name
but like,
people recognize. That's all it is.
Even if something happens to Dobbins, we've seen that Gus Edwards can be efficient in his role. But all worries about Dobbins' health aside, obviously we'll get more clarity on that as training camp goes on. But should Dobbins be ready for the year, which is what everyone believes to happen, when we talked about the AFC North like 8 years ago, I think I proclaimed him as an RB1. I think I said he was going to finish as a top 12 running back, and I stand by that. So I would put him right there with Walker. And like I said, I'm a little more apprehensive about Gibbs than you, but I would lump him in that little top tier of the dead zone, trying to get out of, trying to become alive.
I think that's totally fair. Like I said earlier, like when you get deeper into the draft pool and deeper into rounds, talent and opportunity is what you're focusing on. A lot of the time, these guys lack one or the other. So you get to guys like Cam Akers, I think probably has both. Again, we're just not quite sure exactly how good he is. I think he's good enough, though. Alexander Mattison is a guy that may only have the opportunity. James Conner is a guy that has, I think, a little bit of both. I think the talent may be waning just a tad
I was
as he
gonna
gets
say,
a little
yeah, I
older.
think he's more on life support and the talent thing, but
the opportunity will be there, though. Rashad White is a guy who I think the opportunity is there. The talent is TBD. He was one of the least efficient runners in all of football last year. The one thing that'll help him,
just
and at the
fucking
very
sucked at
least,
running the ball, though.
Yeah, and there's no
awful.
reason to think they're not going to again. The one thing helping him is his pass catching ability, and Baker Mayfield loves to check the ball down. So that will keep him afloat, at least in PPR leagues. David Montgomery is here. Again, a guy who I think is going to be, you'll enjoy him in your flex. I'd be very apprehensive to have him in my RB2 slot because, again, I think too many people are copy and pasting Jamal Williams stats and thinking it's just going to be the same. It's not. It's not going to be exactly the same. And then Isaiah Pacheco and DeAndre Swift are the last two names I have here. Pat, I think as we go on here, Pacheco's making me more nervous than anybody else on this list. And I hate it because as last season ended, I was like, this is a guy I'm drafting next year. I love how hard he runs. He's in the best offense or one of the best offenses in football. He's going to be a monster. Then they re-signed Jerick McKinnon. And then somehow, Pat, look, I know we're early in camp, but already the darling name that we're hearing about is on the Chiefs again. It's Deneric Prince out of Tulsa. And I'm like, why do they keep finding these fucking guys? And also, why they gotta... Why? No, stop. And also, why do they got to ruin my Isaiah Pacheco? Like, he was already going to be a guy that wasn't going to be involved in the pass game. Now you're telling me... I know this is looking way too far ahead, but like the only name that's popping up is a guy that might take some of his rushing upside too. It's just, it's bumming me out, man. I don't like it.
I'm not as concerned about this, but I think the thing is what made Pacheco such a good story is just the fact that he was a 7th-round pick who supplanted a 1st-round pick from a few years ago, granted, who was just bad. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is just not good. Yeah. So that's all well and good, and it's in a great offense. But who's to say that's not going to happen to him too? Because, exactly. These guys get drafted where they get drafted most of the time. Obviously, there are exceptions, guys that exceed their draft capital, but they're there for a reason. They have their apprehension. So who's to say Andy Reid doesn't fall in love with somebody else? So, and again, I think there's plenty to go around there, even with Jerick McKinnon, because we've seen Jerick McKinnon not almost exclusively, but heavily used as a pass catcher. But again, that's the reason why. I'm going to say it with every guy here. There's a strong reason why everyone's here. The only ones that I would say like there is no strong reason is Akers and Connor. But I just think there are other concerns there. More so for Connor. I think Akers is another guy that I think would be fine to not be in this dead zone. But that's the common theme. Like you've either got the safe pick, and you feel like at this point in the draft you want to chase a little floor. But then you look at past years, who are the guys who have excelled? They've been the ceiling guy. Like last year, Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson were both in the dead zone. Harris finished as RB48. Granted, he missed some weeks. And Stevenson finished RB7. Granted, injury does play a role with that, but Stevenson, who is this more change of pace, pass-catching guy, going to get some carries, ends up being the guy. And same deal with Travis Etienne. Etienne is like, he's got a great passing game upside. He's RB17. So it's funny because in theory, you're like, I want to chase floor. I want to chase opportunity. And that would have worked last year if you took a guy like Miles Sanders. But otherwise, it seemed, at least last year, it seemed like the guys that reigned supreme were the more intriguing option in their offense. So if you look at the guys we have listed, the more intriguing guy in the offense is Jahmyr Gibbs in his situation. I think it's Kenneth Walker. It still is Dameon Pierce. I don't like Dameon Pierce, but he's definitely the more appealing option.
I think I'm very out on Dameon Pierce, honestly.
Don't take him in the draft, Dick.
The bus draft?
And then obviously, like I said, Dobbins, Akers, Madison, Connor, White. Those guys are all pretty stable. They have the most stable situations. Yeah. And then Swift is far more intriguing than Rashad Penny. I still think Pacheco is far more intriguing than Jerick McKinnon, and then obviously David Montgomery is not. So while there is some merit to take the boring guy, if you're in this dead zone, you might want to chase the ceiling, especially if you're more like in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, because you don't want to take a safe pick there. Like if you're looking more 6, 7, 8 where you're taking a running back, you might want to chase some floor there. But it seems obviously one year sample size. But in all these situations, whether it's injury, last year, whether it was injury or not, it seemed that this more exciting dynamic option was the one who emerged, at least from a fantasy perspective.
All right, Pat. Pardon the ESPN notification noise. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Let's do this. We're looking at all these names in the dead zone again. Gibbs, Walker, Pierce, Sanders, Dobbins, Akers, Madison, Connor, White, Montgomery, Pacheco, Swift. Take out Kenneth Walker. Take out Jahmyr Gibbs, because, again, kind of the captain of this. And I'm going to say take out Cam Akers because you seem to have an affinity for him. Take out Dobbins too. So let's go Pierce, Sanders, Madison, Connor, White, Montgomery, Pacheco, Swift. You're really picking between some questionable fellas here in some way or another. Who are you taking, or who are you recommending that somebody take out of that mishmash of backs?
So getting rid of Gibbs, Walker, Dobbins, and Akers, I'm going to say Alexander Madison just because of the opportunity. I mean, granted, he's certainly not an untalented running back. I just don't think we've been able to see how talented he is in a large sample size. But we're going to find out this year because he's going to get that sample size. Even though Minnesota's pass-heaviest offense in the league, Dalvin Cook still had over 1,000 yards last year. He was still very, very productive. Madison's younger. So I think that's, in terms of safe, I think he's the best of both worlds out of the group in terms of safe and upside. I think that he is going to be, but they're scary mostly just because we've never seen him do it. But
yeah,
all that aside, looking at his opportunity the best, give me Madison from that bunch.
I agree with you. I've been surprised, Pat, and I know we're not really in full fantasy football mock season, or where a lot of players are drafting yet. I actually think it'll be more interesting when we get people's actual drafts done as we go through the preseason, because not everybody drafts on Labor Day weekend like we do. Where exactly Alexander Madison ends up being picked, because he has not risen the amount I've expected him to. And we're at a point now where I do think he's a really nice value here if you're getting him as your RB2 in the 4th round. Like, the carries are going to be there. That offense is very high powered. And yes, they're going to throw the ball at one of the higher clips in the league, but that's going to just
red zone opportunities, goal line opportunities. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And we also don't have a clear pass catcher in this backfield yet. I mean, look, one of Chandler and McBride have to do something eventually, but like, Madison is the only guy we've ever anything from. He's produced when Dalvin Cook's been out. I've talked before about, like, we don't know how good he is. We don't know if there is talent here, but it might not matter. When you're attached to this team and you're going to get those touches, Madison is a guy who I see as, honestly, Pat, head and shoulders above guys like Connor, White, Pacheco, even Swift. There's just those other guys have
I think there's a considerable gap. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's not necessarily that gap when you're drafting, depending where you look. I mean, Rashad White, Pat, in PPR leagues, I believe, is being picked like top 40. So, and I get that because he is going to catch the ball a lot more than a guy like Alexander Madison will, but you're also drafting a guy who's going to be in, theoretically, a much worse offense. So Madison, I think, is my pick. I'm not necessarily touching a guy like White or Pacheco if I can avoid it, or Connor, even Dameon Pierce. I guess. I mean, should I wait until our bus draft back? Because he's on my big board where I can talk about
he's
him more.
Towards the top of my big board.
He's towards the top. Okay, so either way, we'll talk about him. I'll save the spiel for a little. Actually, I guess it's our next segment.
Well, here's another thing, though. Looking at these underdog rankings, I feel like there's a debtor zone. I think there is a tier of guys below this group that we listed who also have some merit to be drafted. Like, you look at these guys. Javonte Williams, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin and James Cook, Antonio Gibson, Zach Charbonnet, A.J. Dillon, Samaje Perine, Rashad Penny, Brian Robinson. Even go a little further, Damian Harris, Devon Achane, Khalil Herbert, Elijah Mitchell. You know, those are guys that are going to have a defined role. The question is, it's clear that either the talent or the opportunity isn't there. But I still think there's plenty of merit. But those are the guys that you're looking at more if you really punt the position. Like, if you say, I'm going wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, first 5 rounds, I'm loading up. I'm going to have my flex in my – then you're looking more at those guys. But I do think there are some reputable guys. Maybe that's a conversation we could do a segment on the debtor zone next week. Because at the end of the day, these guys are all going to be getting drafted. But and I also think not only is it a bit more robust, it's deeper. You know, like I said, I think we could have at least included, a half dozen to anywhere to 10 of those guys in the dead zone. Obviously, their ADP has to be lower based on only so many spots for these guys to go, but definitely robust and deeper too.
Yeah, starting at Javonte Williams, I mean, he's RB28. So you look at, obviously it's not going to be evenly distributed in your league, but that would mean in a 12-teamer, everybody could have filled their RB1 and 2 slots by then. So these guys are, either going on your bench, assuming you've drafted like a normal human being, or they are potentially a starter if you've really gone with every other position and are going 0 RB, a strategy that is very difficult, but maybe viable given these rankings, because these are the kind of guys that I would expect to see, in the regular dead zone. Like these are some of the names at least that I would think you'd see in the 5th round in years past, but everybody's kind of getting bumped down due to this, correction and love for the receivers lately, even in standard leagues. It's bleeding over a little bit. So I'm down to talk about the deader zone next week, because there are a lot of names in there that are interesting.
Certainly guys to talk about.
There's name brands in there, like you said, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook. I mean, really,
those were my first 2 picks last year in our league, Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara, and now they're in the debtor zone.
Oh my God, that's funny. That's, not reflective of how your season went, but not unreflective of how your season went.
No, there's a reason those 2 are down where they are, and there's a reason I didn't make the playoffs.
Yeah, so it'll be fun to break those guys down and see who has maybe the most value. I think the toughest part about, if you, like you said, you went 3 receivers, tight end, and quarterback in the first 5 rounds, is just like inevitably some of these guys are going to break out, but like you'd have to spend your next like 5 or 6 picks on running backs to find the guys who are to have a decent chance at getting the guys who are going to do that. And maybe that's worth it, because again, you filled those other positions already, so why not? But it's an interesting draft strategy.
That was the problem with what you did last year, because you kind of did that, but you also took Javonte Williams, so like you didn't have to. So like you were throwing darts there, but you didn't have the establishment. Like, say you had taken, I forget who your first round pick was, but like
Justin Jefferson was my first.
So say you had taken Justin Jefferson and then a guy like DK Metcalf in the first 2 rounds, and then like you're really loaded. Then what you were doing was a bit more understandable, but I think that's more just in general. Like if you are going to commit to no running back, commit.
Yeah.
Really commit. And like I said, I've thought about it harder than I ever have in my life than I have this year.
Yeah, I think me taking Javonte last year too, it just sucked because like, yes, his lack of production coincided with the Broncos being bad, who I was just wrong about the Broncos as a whole. I was very high on that team and I shouldn't have been. But Javonte would have been okay if he stayed healthy. Like he would have been, I think he would have finished as a back end RB1. So I try not to beat myself up about that one too much. What fucked me last year was taking Pitts in the 3rd and not getting a guy who should have given me actual 3rd round production.
That's the thing, is you've really got to hit when you go those other positions besides wide receiver. Like if you're going to go tight end or quarterback in the first 2 or 3 rounds, you've really got to hit on it. I
took him before Mark Andrews. I mean, Mark Andrews had a bad year in his own right because he was hurt and Lamar was hurt, but like still, don't do that. Don't like take such a big risk with one of your first few picks because it will backfire. It's funny, Pat, as much as I punted running back, RB2 was not my issue. I started Raheem Mostert most of the time and he was fine. Like he was good enough. So that was not the issue.
That's what I'm saying. You threw a bunch of darts and that's what you're saying. If you throw enough, you'll probably find a guy, or at least you'll find guys a few weeks at a time, and then you'll find the next guy. Because at that point, you're piecemealing your team, and you're going to be piecemealing it probably for most of the year. But, yeah, definitely the most interesting dead. I remember vividly looking at the dead zone last year and just being like, ew. And that was why I went Dalvin and Alvin in the first 2 rounds, because I'm like, I want running backs. And there were a lot of receivers I loved in those middle rounds. Most of them turned out to stink. So fortunately, that never happened either. But yeah, and again, it all depends on your league. Like our non-PPR league, running backs are going to fly. The dead zone is going to enter the late 2nd round and the early 3rd round. So I think in our position, and that's why I'm more keen on punting running back, because it's like, especially with everyone else taking running backs earlier, that leaves room for the other positions to to get really good values at other spots.
Do me a favor and punt running back, because then I have a chance at getting Tony Pollard in the 2nd. Thank you very much.
Hey, it all depends. It all depends on who's there.
It's a possibility. Yeah, just to put a pin or put a bow on this running back dead zone thing. What it comes down to is you've got so many more guys with reliable workloads this year. Last year, the face of that sort of segment of the draft was a guy like A.J. Dillon, who we knew firmly was in a timeshare. This year, you're getting guys who are firmly workhorse backs. They just have other questions around their team. But it's questions that you're willing to deal with at that point in your draft for sure, assuming you've already locked up a good running back and a couple good receivers or something to that effect. Pat, last week we were going to do a draft of our projected biggest busts or overvalued players in fantasy drafts as of right now. Kind of ran out of time. We just gave one each. I said Derrick Henry, which was due to age. You said Darren Waller?
I said Devontae Adams.
Devontae Adams, sorry.
So do we want to just put them at the top of our teams here? So are we getting a 6th man? So are we basically going to have a 6th round draft?
I'll say those guys are our sixth men, and we can start the draft from scratch. Or those guys could be like the team captains, I guess. Those will be the team captains.
So effectively a 6-round draft,
Effectively,
okay.
yeah. Okay, we'll do that. I don't know who has the first pick, as always, because I don't fucking keep track.
So movie draft. I had the first pick, so it's you.
Okay, so it's me with the first pick. All right. Well, I had Derrick Henry. He's my team captain. I'm going to go with a guy that I've basically said all I needed to say about him already. It's Kyle Pitts. Said it all last week. This man belongs on my bust squad. But look, we said it all last week. Tight end 5. Not enough is changing for me to believe that his outlook is going to change that much. The fact that his ADP has effectively, I'm not going to say not changed, but that his standing among tight end has almost not changed. Like, I picked him as, I think, the maybe second one off the board, yikes, last year, after Travis Kelce, because I picked him before Andrews. I know that, but he was going as,
I almost got Andrews. I was so excited.
I think he was going as the third or fourth last year. So the fact that he's sitting here as tight end 5 right now on a lot of platforms is just not. No, he should not be. So I'm going to go with Kyle Pitts as my
like I said, very, very lofty for tight end 5, basically, because if you're picking him, you need someone else, and you should not do that at tight end 5. Tight end 5 needs to be your guy.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're going with that.
Hold on. Time out here. This is just coming in now. I mean, it's not going to be breaking. I guess for the 9 people watching this, it is. Justin Herbert has agreed to a 5-year, $262.5 million extension. Monster.
Get that money,
contract.
Herbie.
I'm assuming that resets the market. I'm guessing that's the highest paid. It's $53 million a year. I'm pretty sure that's tops now. So well deserved.
Yes,
Justin
that is.
Herbert.
So Lamar's going into this year would have been 52 million a year. So
Okay.
Herbert is going to be the highest paid quarterback. And I don't know who's next. I don't know who's due for a payday next. Joe Burrow. Oh, yep. Looking at this list, holy shit! Yeah, it's Joe Burrow.
Yeah, so Justin Herbert getting paid, honestly, what he deserves. I've said it before, too. He is going to show people that he is worth this year. With Kellen Moore helping things out, this is a guy who's not defined by his numbers last year that were underwhelming. This is one of the, I would say, 3 most purely talented quarterbacks in the league. And this year his statistics, I believe, will match. And obviously the Chargers believe that as well. So just wanted to get that out there. Pat, you may continue.
Yeah. All right, so I am going to go to the wide receiver position, even though I know I'm probably going to get sniped here on my next pick, but he'll be discussed at least. So I'm going to go Deebo Samuel here. Okay. He's going currently wide receiver 18 in ADP 34, so that's lower end of the third round. Mm-hmm. I just think, assuming Brock Purdy is the quarterback, there are a lot of mouths to feed in that offense. You look at Christian McCaffrey, you look at George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, all guys who had good years and all guys who looked good particularly with Purdy, especially Kittle. I at least talked about how much I like Kittle this year. I think Samuel had such a monster year. It was more so out of how he was used. You know, he was this uber gadget guy. He was running the ball like crazy. He was catching the ball like crazy. He was throwing the ball a little bit. He was returning kicks and punts. So he was doing everything. And obviously Kyle Shanahan realized that was just not practical. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, that passed. It wasn't that long ago, 2021, wasn't it? So it's not that far removed, but I would not take him. You know, similar, again, I'm not saying I'm out on him, but I am not taking him as a wide receiver 2, especially you look at some of these, other options around him, like Amari Cooper, far safer than him. I like the upside of Calvin Ridley and Jerry Jeudy and Christian Watson a bit more than Deebo. So he's my de facto number 2 pick here.
I like that. I looked at him, Pat, and I was with you. Like, Deebo is not a guy I've been remotely considering in drafts, but the reason that I didn't pick him for this is I just looked at wide receiver 18, and I was like, man, I feel like the risk might be sort of baked in already, because like the season people are chasing, or at least that people remember, where he was wide receiver 3, right? And I was like, okay, right now he's ranked such a far cry off of that he's not going to ever get back there, but if he reaches even wide receiver 10, like, you're getting a return on value. But I'm with you. I think that 1 year is also kind of chasing the dragon, much like Kadarius Toney, where it's probably just not going to happen again. He hasn't. I'm trying to find the exact numbers, but I don't think he's ever finished anywhere close to that any other year of his career. I mean, his second best year was probably, and he only played 13 games last year. I guess I could go by the per game numbers last year of whatever he he did. Let's see. Debo, wide receiver. I'm curious where he lands in fantasy points per game. So scroll down here. I think he's pretty low, to be honest.
Just
with
while
you.
you look, I'll talk to our audience a bit. And then I've scrolled even further down on these wide receiver rankings. There are other guys who's at least I'm more intrigued by. Drake London, Terry McLaurin, Mike Williams, DJ Moore, Christian Kirk. These are all guys that when I look at that name, like I get a little more excited about them than I do Debo too.
Yeah.
So just looking further down, I'm just at that value. Nope.
Points per game wide receiver 25 last year. So, you may be drafting him too high even still at wide receiver 18. So, yeah, I'm with you. I'm not really in on Debo Samuel. Pat, I am going to snipe you with our boy that we teased at here. I'm going to go with Dameon Pierce. I think, look, getting hyped on a Texan right now is already a risky enough proposition, but here are some numbers last year. I actually got this info from Alex Caruso on Twitter, who provides some really good info. I don't necessarily
great
love
follow.
the format.
Great follow.
He does all these threads, and I'm just like, it doesn't need to be so many tweets, but great info. He had this nugget that Dameon Pierce had 17 points per game in games in which he had 20 plus touches, 8.7 fantasy points per game in games where he had less than 20 touches. I am not a huge Devin Singletary guy, but he is the most real competition that Dameon Pierce has had. He was dealing with Dare Ogunbowale,
Rex Burkhead,
and Rex Burkhead. This is actual competition. Dameon Pierce is one of the best in the league at breaking tackles. That is a fact, but I just don't think that the scoring opportunities are going to be there enough to offset the fact that he has real competition now. And he's just not a guy, again, in that dead zone, not a guy that excites me as much as some of the other options there.
Yeah, and obviously, again, agreed entirely. Not a huge Devin Singletary guy, but he is leaps and bounds better, and he's also proven to be a very good pass-catching back, which seems to be not Pierce's weakness, but he's a better pure runner than a pass catcher, and I think they're going to use him a lot because they're going to be losing a lot. And like you said, I remember even from week to week last year because I owned Pierce in a few leagues, and I'm looking, I'm like, the usage to production was insane for him. Yeah. He was dropping in standard leagues. He's dropping single-digit points. Like he's dropping like clunkers, 5 points, but then he pops off and you're like, oh, this guy's great. Even without Singletary, if they're not winning games, he's not going to get that usage. So, yeah, I agree. He was probably my next pick if you didn't go with him.
Yeah, had to get him off the board. And again, what was the draft capital for Dameon Pierce? Round 4, pick 107. So again, a guy that it's like you are on the hot seat if you're drafted in like the 3rd round or later. Until further notice, basically. Like, you need to have a couple years of good production for you to not be at risk of being replaced. Unless you're like Russell Wilson his rookie year, like when he just went. Obviously, then we're going to just move on from him. But, it's a dicey thing.
Yeah. Continuing with the D's nuts got him. I'm going to go with a near and dear friend. Probably my second favorite player in the entire NFL. I wish him well, but I'm going to go Darren Waller here.
Okay. 5 of the 6 busts so far, including our team captains, are letter D. That's very strange.
And I picked 2 of them who are either on my team or formerly on my team.
Yeah.
The thing with Waller is I think, a lot of people are pointing to the Giants' crowded pass-catching room, which is still hysterical. And they signed Cole Beasley. They signed...
Bro, they
signed our
to
boy
sign
Throw
a receiver.
Rogan over here.
They will not sign a receiver over 6 feet tall. They will not. They are lava.
And obviously, some of these guys are not going to make it through training camp. They've got, but off the top of my head, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, Isaiah Hodgins was probably the best of that bunch. Paris
Jamison
Campbell,
Crowder
Cole Beasley, Jamison Crowder, Daniel Bellinger, Saquon. What? Like,
yeah, I don't know.
This is a team, and again, Daniel Jones, granted, much better year last year for Daniel Jones. I think Daniel Jones is heading in the right direction, but he's still not this proficient pass thrower that can feed all these mouths. But I think the bigger thing that's being overlooked is just his age. He's getting old. He was a late bloomer. I mean, he's 30 years old, and like we said, for a receiver, that's not a big deal. But for a tight end that has been oft injured the last few years, kind of a guy who was not expected to do very much to begin his career, I think the combination injuries, age, opportunity, and again, even where he's getting, I believe he's tight end 7, tight end 7. Again, at tight end 7, you should not have to draft another guy to supplant him in your lineup. You should be using that bench for a better dart throw. And if I'm drafting a guy as a 7th tight end off the board, I should not need a backup.
Totally agree. Funny enough, Pat, I think I'm going to go to another guy, letter D. I just want to get these numbers out here. Okay, so where is he on Fantasy Pros? This guy's bust status really depends on where he's ranked and where he gets picked in your league. But I was operating off of, ESPN rankings had him at wide receiver 12. Underdog has him at wide receiver 15. So maybe it's not as big of a fall off as you'd think, but just a guy who I think his upside's a little capped. I'm going to go with DK Metcalf. I think DK Metcalf, D, again, fucking letter D. So DK Metcalf is a guy, let's assume we go off that wide receiver 12 number. The last 3 years, Pat, he's finished as wide receiver 18, wide receiver 12, and wide receiver 7. So look, he returned value or met that value 2 of those 3 years, right? First of all, the 2 years he met and returned that value were with Russell Wilson. Second of all, in terms of fantasy points per game, last year he was wide receiver 27. Year before that, wide receiver 19. Year before that, wide receiver 10. So we look at that 2020 season, that's kind of what you're chasing if you draft him as the 12th wide receiver off the board. And I just think you compound this issue with JSN now. Jackson Smith-Njigba is here. He is the best wide receiver from this class, at least from a profile perspective. And I just don't know how you expect these numbers from Metcalf, again, per game, last 2 seasons, 20 wide receiver 27, wide receiver 19. You expecting that to get better as they bring in a new, major target for Geno Smith? I just don't see it. And you've got a new running back who can apparently catch some passes here with Zach Charbonnet. Yeah. I just don't see it. I don't think. Look, DK Metcalf, again, this is a draft of players who are overvalued. DK Metcalf is not going to completely sink your team if you pick him. I just don't think he should be picked where he's going right now. I think he's a few picks overvalued. And again, we just got another letter D here because fuck it, why not?
There is one more letter D guy. I'm not going to pick him here.
There's one more I'm looking at too, and I might pick him next. I don't know.
There are a few low-hanging fruit picks, but obviously we talked about the RB dead zone. So I'm looking at a couple guys that I'm honestly surprised aren't in the RB dead zone, and I think are probably a little less better off than guys in that dead zone. So let's see here. I'll go first here. I feel like this is so low-hanging fruit, and I know there's a stan of his. I don't remember who it was, but if the Najee Harris stan is here, please stand up.
No.
We saw such a big year from him, I believe 2021, where he had the usage, he had the pass catching, he had all this, and you look at it, and it's like he doesn't have a ton of competition, but Jaylen Warren was incredibly efficient last year with his touches, whether he was on the ground, whether it was in the air. And again, you can also say last year he's recovering from a Lisfranc, a very difficult injury for a running back to get over. He could be better off from that. But that combination with Kenny Pickett being able to run, and I do like the Steelers' offense to improve a bit more, but I'm just kind of in the bandwagon where it's like, I don't know if this guy's all that good.
Yeah, you don't know if he's that good. That's a fair assessment.
Again, I'm no football guy. I'm not watching the tape here. So if you want to come after me with things like that, go for it. You're probably right. You probably know more than I do.
Feel free to dig into it more than we do. But look, I think sometimes people that are fantasy players have a good nose for this stuff sometimes, because people who are actually digging into it may overthink it a little bit. I don't know. Just trying
he's a guy that I just look through the rankings and I just get to him and I say yuck.
Yeah.
And then I scroll down and I see several guys where I do not say that. So,
yeah, I think that makes sense. God, who do I want to go with here for my next pick? I talked too much about Josh Jacobs being a value a few weeks ago for me to pick him here, but he was on my short list of players, I will say that much. I'm going to go with another tight end. I'm going to go with TJ Hawkinson.
Oh, okay.
And I'm starting to just fall way more in love with this back end of the top 10 group of guys than I am at the guys that were like 3 through 6. Like,
no one was loving those guys more than me when we were going through our. Nobody slurped off Chig, obviously Chig, and then Njoku and Freiermuth more than me. So I am with you.
Yeah, I think this tier, and look, we're going to have them all covered between our two little squadrons here of Hawkinson, Pitts, and Waller. I just think there's not value here that you're not going to be getting a lot of value here. Hawkinson got traded to Minnesota, got a ton of targets, but I think he was benefiting a lot off the fact that Adam Thielen was basically, I don't want to say washed up, but not being used the way he was once used in Minnesota.
Even as recently as 2021, the usage was startling.
Exactly. And now them drafting Jordan Addison, look, I know banking on a rookie receiver to be a major impact and be a guy who's going to hurt the value of an established target like TJ Hawkinson may be a risky proposition, but I'm comfortable saying that Jordan Addison's going to have a pretty big role in this offense, and I just think he's going to have a bigger role than Adam Thielen, and so naturally that's going to take some targets away from Hawkinson because they're not getting taken away from Justin Jefferson, I can tell you that much. So I just think Hawkinson, he's not a guy that I dislike, but he's the guy that kind of, again, exists in his own tier as tight end 3, where you feel like you're getting this guy who's going to be, steady Eddie in that position. And I don't know that he's going to be as steady as he was last year. Also not a letter D to mix it up. So that's fair. Again, but I agree with most of what you said. But at the end of the day, like, tight end is such a bad position. So even with that, he certainly will be viable. Will he be viable at tight end 3? Maybe not. Maybe he's more of like a tight end 5 or a 6. But again, that's what we're here for. We're finding guys who are overvalued, and that's drastic. Right.
Tight end 3 and tight end 6 is probably going to be pretty drastic.
It's a big drop off usually. So,
I feel like a lot of our guys have not been super hot takes here, and I don't know if this is one either. I haven't seen a ton of talk about it, but this was another guy that I thought was going to be in the dead zone, and I'm going to go with Travis Etienne.
Okay, he was on my short list as well.
I think the biggest thing with him is everyone's favorite guy, Tank Bigsby.
Yeah.
Not just on that should be one of our drafts, the name draft. Oh, that's a good one.
Oh, a current name draft, yeah.
Current name draft, and then we could even do a retired name draft. But
DeBrickashaw.
But yeah, if we're doing DeBrickashaw. Dan Smith, BYU. If we're doing if we're talking names, Tank Bigsby, but I think he's just more than a name because this is it could not be more of a different player than Etienne. Like, obviously, when they drafted him in the first round, Urban Meyer, was basically like, he's going to be used as a receiver, and, he's going to be, he's a great pass catcher. This could be our version of that. And obviously, James Robinson just kind of stunk and got hurt and all this and that, and it allowed Etienne a bigger role. But now, I think Bigsby's kind of a guy to cut into that role. I mean, Etienne still has good PPR value. And you look at last year, one rushing touchdown in the last 8 weeks. Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah, he only had...
That's tough.
Did he only have 5 rushing touchdowns last year? He had 5 and then 1 in the postseason. That is, I mean, especially looking at that from non-PPR, that is not that kind of value. Will he still be a viable play? Absolutely, but again, I like 3, 4, 5 guys in the dead zone better than him.
Yeah, Etienne's a guy who's going to benefit from. I think this whole Jags team is going to take a step forward. And I guess, since we don't have a subject coming up on this, I guess I should just get this take out there. I think Trevor Lawrence is just my favorite quarterback in fantasy this year, and I want him on my team really badly. So I think the Jags team overall, thanks to his development and the weapons that they've put around him and just another year of actual stable management and coaching, I think the Jags are going to be a force to be reckoned with this year, and that'll hopefully increase some of those scoring opportunities for Etienne. But again, I'm with you. I think Tank Bigsby is going to be a thorn in the side of Etienne owners, and it's just you're not going to get workhorse Travis Etienne if that's what you're hoping for. I don't think that's what you're going to get. There's other guys who will probably surpass his touch total who you can get well after him in drafts. 100% agree. All right, let's go back to the letter D here one final time. And Pat, it's a guy who you mentioned going in the right direction, but I'm going to take Daniel Jones. This is a guy that is obviously not being drafted as a super high-end starter, but I think it's a guy that if you wait on quarterback and you draft either only him or you stick with him a little too long, I think it could hurt you because Daniel Jones had a career year running the football last year. Daniel Jones has now signed this massive extension. It's reasonable to think they're going to ask him to throw a little bit more because you're probably not paying $40 million to a guy to throw so few touchdowns. How many touchdowns did he have last year? It wasn't a lot. I can't remember. Hold on.
No, and they had a lot of weeks as well. We were talking about the Falcons last week. They had a lot of weeks where they weren't throwing the ball that much in general.
Yeah, so Daniel Jones last season, 15 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, played 16 games. They're probably going to ask him to throw a little bit more or at least hope that develops. And I just think I don't have faith in his development as a passer, and I don't think defenses are going to let him carve them up on the ground all the time. Like, this is a guy, yes, he has rushing talent, but so does Marcus Mariota, And it's like at a certain point, if you can't throw the ball, you can't throw the ball, and defenses are going to make you. So I I don't know. I don't know that the rushing is going to be as extreme as it was last year. And if you're drafting him at this point as QB like 11 or 12, whatever he is, that's what you're hoping for, because the passing right now is not there. You have to have some real faith in his development as a player for him to return value in my eyes. And I'm not with it. So adding another D to my list here.
I was going to say, I've got 2 running backs, I've got 2 receivers, I've got a tight end. So I will give them a signal caller as well. And I'm honestly surprised I have to term this guy a bust, because I'm surprised at this hype train. I'm going Anthony Richardson.
Yes. Yes.
Despite...
Makes me sad, but yes.
Despite all the love with how much of a weapon he is with his legs, and, we've seen guys like Justin Fields last year, who clearly wasn't polished throwing the ball in a bad offense, really succeed. But I feel like there were talks, like, this is a guy that should sit for a year. And unfortunately, he's just in a position where they're probably not going to sit him for Gardner Minshew, and I don't think they should. But I think there's going to be a steep learning curve. I mean, I think he's a fine bye-week fill-in, and he's going to have weeks where he's going to pop, and he's going to run for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns, and you're going to be happy as hell that you started him. But I think there's going to be some really ugly weeks. Like, if I had to draft my QB1 that late, I'd taken Daniel Jones. As disgusting as Dak Prescott is, I'm taking Dak Prescott. I'm taking my boy Kirk Cousins. I'm taking Aaron Rodgers. Like, I'm taking Jared Goff. Like, I am going to go safety over the upside, just because I think the floor is the bench for Anthony Richardson, realistically, especially if/when they aren't winning football games.
Yeah, so I'll disagree with you in a sense that I think when Anthony Richardson's on the field, I think he'll provide enough value with his legs and with a great play caller and coach like Shane Steichen that he'll be okay. The reason that I am with you right now, and for people who are drafting, now or in the next week or a little earlier than, we like to draft a week before the season, which is helpful because we have basically all the info we need. And we will know if Anthony Richardson is a starter. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he starts week 1. There have been reports now that, and I don't know, I'm trying to dig up a source on this, but and maybe it's just all fake, but it's some verified bullshit Twitter account with 100,000 followers, I don't know, said Richardson is reportedly thought to take over the starting role by or before the Colts play in Germany in Week 10. Now, look, Week 10 may be lofty, but also I think it would be irresponsible to assume right now that Anthony Richardson is definitely going to start Week 1. You have to be monitoring what's going to happen in training camp, and it's the exact reason that I passed on him for Aaron Rodgers in the Scott Fish Bowl draft. So I think you have to go with safer guys who are actually going to play, and I agree. Anybody who drafted him already,
especially in best ball, when you've got guys that might not, a guy that might not even be out there. But I love the talent. I love the upside, and you make a lot of fair points, but I just don't see. And you saw situations where it's like, oh, Andy Dalton's our starter, and then Justin Fields, and there could be a situation where Gardner Minshew's starting, and they're not winning games, and they're going to see the pitchforks. Hey, we took this guy with the 3rd overall pick. Get him on the field.
He'll start eventually.
Oh, he will. But it's just, first of all, he will not be a QB1 by the time the year starts. Even if he is the starter, this talk about Minshew is going to knock him out of the QB1 range. But even as a high-end QB2, I'm still, like I said, I just named a half dozen guys that are way more boring than him that I would rather take as a high-end QB, low-end QB1, high-end QB2.
Yeah, I guess we do disagree in the sense that I think he'll be good once he's on the field. But I just think, look, very realistic chance that he's not. I mean, you think back several years ago, Jared Goff was the number 1 overall pick and did not start the season. Case Keenum did. So this is not unprecedented by any means. Anthony Richardson being, what was he, the 3rd quarterback off the board? So
yes, 4th overall, right?
So I think, look, it's just not out of the question. If we get to Labor Day weekend for our draft and it's been confirmed that Anthony Richardson is the starter, I might think about it. But for now, it's just very risky, and I'm not a fan. So that is our draft of fantasy football busts or overvalued players, since you guys ask me all the time. I've got Derrick Henry, Kyle Pitts, Damian Pierce, DK Metcalf, TJ Hawkinson, and Daniel Jones. Pat has Devontae Adams, Deebo Samuel, Darren Waller, Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, and Anthony Richardson. So let us know which of those picks you agree with, who has compiled the better list of potential busts or overvalued players. We'd love to hear what you guys think, and then let us know.
Lord have mercy, I'm about to bust.
All right, I'm canceling the podcast now. Okay.
But I got to mention one thing about our drafts. Are you playing Immaculate Grid? For those of you listening, are you guys playing Immaculate Grid? Because especially today, so many of our guys from our last draft, like Bronco 1,000 yards. I got a lot of shit for my Brandon Lloyd pick.
I picked Brandon Lloyd too.
That was the first thought that popped into my head. I'm like, Brandon Lloyd, who I forgot all about, is saving me. I use Ryan Fitzpatrick. I use Billy Volek. Like a lot of guys that are getting mentioned. A lot of guys that are getting mentioned because, like, football, like baseball, I'm a fucking stud at the Immaculate Grid baseball because that's my thing, is knowing what teams guys play for. I got a rarity score of 16 one day. Like, I can pop at that. So I like that. I'm going deep into that, like, just trying to find the weirdest motherfuckers I can think of. Football, I'm just trying to get it done. If I can, I'm going to go obscure, but I'm just trying to achieve that. They also just dropped men's basketball today. That'll be a fun one too. But yeah, so if you guys out there aren't playing, Immaculate Grid, it's just so much fun. It's just a blast, and it's under the Sports Reference umbrella now, so they've really made it. Like after you're done, you can look and see all the combinations of who you could have taken. Yeah. It's such a fun game. Yeah, like it's right up my alley. I love it.
I play it every day. I spend way too much time doing it. I had a hell of a pull yesterday with Dolphins-Patriots. Mike Gillislee was a 0.1% pull.
Oh, see, I went Jonas Gray. I went in a similar vein. He was like 0.4.
I was very proud of mine today, although it is still a whole percent, 1%. Ravens-Texans, Pat. Do you recall who you put for Ravens-Texans?
I'll pull mine up right now. I actually didn't finish.
Okay, so maybe you didn't get this square.
Yeah. Mine wasn't a pull. Mine was a 20%er.
Okay, I had Vonta Leach, so I was pretty thrilled about that.
Oh, my God, I love fullbacks.
I knew you'd appreciate. That's why I was curious if maybe you also had the fullback pull.
I took our boy Mark Ingram. And
that's a good one.
In that one. My best pull of the day, maybe we could do this. We could have a weekly pull. My biggest pull was Brandon Lloyd, 2%. Only other one that was like a solid pull, Latavius Murray for Ravens Broncos, which are his two of his most recent teams. Yeah. I still need Titans, Broncos, and Ravens, Chargers. There's a Ravens, Chargers guy that's like smacking me on the head, and I just cannot fucking.
You'll be mad. It's a 54%er.
See, my big problem is I'm so fantasy driven in football. Like I know defenders, I know defenders, but like my first instinct is offensive skill players. That's like I'm trying to look today. Do I have any non-offensive skill players? No, I have exclusively skill position players right now.
I have one, and it's this guy. That's the only guy who was a defensive player.
Defender, Ravens, Chargers. Shit.
54% Ravens, Chargers. I don't want to give it away, but
don't give it away. Oh, it's Eric Weddle.
It's Eric Weddle.
It's Eric Weddle. Fuck. All right, now Titans, Broncos.
I actually didn't get. I got a Titan Bronco. I did not get a Titan Charger. So sadly,
I went Billy Volek. Billy Volek.
See, I wouldn't have got that. I looked at some of the other possible answers, and they were all. There was one. I was mad I didn't get Charlie Whitehurst. That was the one that I was like, I guess I could have got that.
Clipboard Jesus, yeah.
But
yeah, and I went Immaculate on the men's basketball one today. Do I have any funny polls? Honestly, my funniest poll was 20-plus points per game for season. Russell Westbrook, 2% for the Rockets. Like, what?
Oh, my God. Because people just...
That's the first guy I think of when in terms of stats. That's the first name I'm thinking is Russell Westbrook. I'm sure Harden's like 80% on that one. UConn legend Rip Hamilton also had him for the Pistons. But this is fun, guys. Whether you're a baseball fan, apparently they're talking hockey. They have men's basketball. I'm sure they'll have a women's basketball one. But this is just...
Yeah.
There's that tweet where it's like men just sit around and name random former athletes. Like that is the epitome of the Immaculate Grid, and it is glorious. Play it.
This was a great call, Pat, because now we will do a best of Immaculate Grid segment every week and talk about just who.
Yeah, I'll screenshot. I'll start screenshotting my and send them in if you get an awesome score. Hit us up. Hit us up.
Send them in. We'll shout you out.
Little segment maybe. Our own best scores of the best polls of the week in our listeners. That'd be fun.
No cheating though. If you're 11 years old and you're pulling guys from 1975, I know what you're fucking doing. So I'm watching you. All right, let's finish this out with our viewer questions, Pat. First question: are any defenses or kickers, and if so, how high in fantasy? So obviously, look, Pat, again, we draft Labor Day weekend. We need to draft those positions at that point because what some people will do if you draft a little earlier is not draft one of those positions, kind of play the waivers of whatever's happening in the preseason, use that extra roster spot, and then eventually fill it before week one. So obviously you get the points. So for us, we're always drafting those spots. What I would say, the only kicker year to year that is worth a damn is Justin Tucker. And honestly, I may be in the minority here, but in a 12-team league like ours, Pat, I have nothing against taking Tucker starting in like the 13th round because you're getting to a point where the other guys are such major dart throws. I would like to have the advantage or the comfort of a guy like Justin Tucker in my kicker spot. So if you do that, no harm done. Defense, I mean, like, yeah, you need to get one, but for those that don't know, defense is the most volatile position in fantasy sports if you still use it, because there's just like, don't ever be the guy that's the first one to take the top defense off the board, because it's some crazy stat like whoever are the top defenses one year just never repeat, basically. It's so based on turnovers and touchdowns at things that are, you know, sort of happenstance. You just kind of, you don't know what defenses are going to pop off for fantasy purposes year to year, so you just got to keep an eye out. Usually you can get a really, really good one off the waiver wire. So yes, you probably have to draft one, but don't invest highly.
See, I think in an ideal world, kickers are not a thing. Like people ask me, like,
I think that's
fair.
You
make your ideal league. Like you are the commissioner. You have all the power over the rules. I am putting in an extra flex position over a kicker. I just think it shouldn't be as important. Defense, I'm not a fan of defense anyway, but it's so fucking fun. Like I had a year, it wasn't last year, the year before, where like in the 12, 13 weeks, I had like 10 double-digit weeks using like 8 different defenses. Like maybe that'll be a segment. But then you're just gonna fucking cuck me on waivers with all my defense guys. But the way I see it is, if you're super late into a draft, like round 13, 14, I'm not taking the top defense. I'm taking a defense that has an excellent matchup week 1 or three excellent matchups week 4, because more likely than not, that defense is going to contribute more to you winning games than some random running back or wide receiver you take a flyer on, who may not even. We draft on Labor Day, and there are guys that don't even make it 5 days that we draft. So if you're at a point where you really don't like anyone, unless you have a guy you really like and you see a defense is sitting there that could help you win 2 or 3 weeks to start the year, absolutely. But besides that, a kicker, last round, 15th, 16th round, whatever. Defense, I said,
if you don't get
I
Tucker,
would never go early on a defense, though. But like once you get to like 14, you're probably not in love with a lot of the guys back there. So if you're in love with a defense for a few weeks, do it. I'm also a big fan of stashing defenses. I look way ahead.
I do too.
I'll pick up a defense that I'm not going to play for 2 weeks just because I know it's that good of a matchup. But definitely on my cheat sheet every year at the draft, I have the schedules. For the first 3 weeks of the league because that's as unimportant as it is, it can win you game. Like if your defense has a nice day, getting like 10 points out of your defense, that could be the difference. As stupid as it is, it counts. It's a position, so you got to do something. But don't go crazy.
No, I haven't dug too far into defenses and their schedules. The one thing I did think to look up just now, though, watch out for the Commanders' defense playing the Arizona Cardinals week 1, and it's
That's
at
what I'm saying.
Washington.
Look for the Cardinals. Look for the
Texans, the Buccaneers.
Look for the Texans. Unfortunately, look for the Raiders. But you know what I'm saying? Like find those teams, target those teams.
Yeah, target the bad teams.
Draft them
always.
A few rounds earlier. Do it. It might help you win some games.
Absolutely. Next question. Are either of you watching Quarterback on Netflix? Pat, did you watch it at all?
No. If you ask any question about me watching something like that for you at home, the answer will almost always be no.
My answer is yes. I watched through the whole thing. What I will say is it's a solid, like, B-plus show. Like, if you're a big football fan, it's a lot of behind the scenes. You get to see some of the personality of these, like, of Patrick Mahomes, Kirk Cousins, Marcus Mariota. Definitely humanizes them, which I think is cool. Just if you're addicted to football, you won't be bored by it. But I will say it's nothing revolutionary, but you wouldn't expect it to be. It's documenting a season that, as football fans, we all watched. We all know what happened, generally. So it's just a little behind the scenes, peek behind the curtain.
And I imagine there will be a season 2, and obviously, like other shows, they'll learn from, and it'll probably get better and better. So, yeah,
exactly.
Like I said, that's just not me. Even as much as I like sports, I'm just not the kind of person to sit down and take that kind of time out of my day to do that.
Yeah, it was diet Hard Knocks, but I also don't watch Hard Knocks, so whatever.
Yeah.
Last question. Many teams are refusing to pay a top running back. So my question is, can you find my dad for me? No, I can't.
Are you looking for one? Tell your mom to hit me up.
All right. Folks, that'll do it for this week. I'll see you next week for Pat Gustafson, who for the 4th week in a row is fired. I'm Brandon Carney.
I should be suspended without pay.
You're a bona fide scrub. Goodbye. We'll see you next week.